The detection came at 4:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, when the object was still 3 million kilometers out and decelerating hard enough to light up every gravitational sensor from Luna to the Kuiper Belt stations. Dr. Sarachan had been pulling a double shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Array in Auckland when her coffee mug started vibrating across the desk, and the entire sensor grid went from its usual background hum of cosmic static to a shrieking wall of red alerts. For exactly 7 seconds, she thought they were experiencing a catastrophic system failure. Then the computer finished its calculations, and Sarah realized with cold clarity that she was looking at something far worse than any malfunction. Something massive had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, and it was headed directly toward them with the kind of precision that only came from intelligence and intent. Within 20 minutes, every major government on Earth had been notified. Within an hour, the object had been visually confirmed by the Hubble 13 telescope array, and Sarah's worst fears were realized. The ship, because it was undeniably a ship, measured approximately 47 kilometers from bow to stern, roughly the size of a small moon. Its hull was composed of a dark metallic substance that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving it the appearance of a void-shaped wound in space itself. Massive structures jutted from its surface at irregular intervals, some clearly weapon emplacements if the energy signatures were any indication, others mysterious in purpose. The vessel's design followed no human aesthetic, all flowing organic curves mixed with brutal geometric efficiency, as if someone had crossbred a cathedral with a weapon of war and launched it into the cosmos. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and it was coming to Earth. The world held its breath as humanity's leaders scrambled to coordinate a response. The United Earth Council, formed only 15 years earlier after the climate wars had finally convinced the nations that cooperation was preferable to extinction, convened an emergency session. Military forces across the globe went to high alert. The handful of armed spacecraft humanity had managed to put into orbit, pitifully small defense satellites and 3 experimental railgun platforms, began moving into intercept positions with all the effectiveness of house cats preparing to fight a dragon. Deep in bunkers and command centers, generals and presidents watched their screens and made calculations that all led to the same conclusion. If this ship was hostile, if it had traveled across the light years with conquest in mind, then humanity was looking at its final hours as a free species, if not its extinction. Commander Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the UESC Valiant, humanity's first and only true warship, a vessel that had seemed impressive when it launched 5 years ago but now felt like a child's toy. The Valiant was 300 meters of cutting-edge human engineering, equipped with nuclear-tipped missiles, electromagnetic cannons, and enough firepower to level a continent. Against the massive alien vessel that now dominated his forward display, it might as well have been armed with harsh language. Marcus was a career military officer, had fought in 3 different conflicts, and had never once felt the cold hand of helplessness that now gripped his heart. He was 53 years old, twice divorced, and had a daughter named Emma who was studying marine biology in Sydney. He found himself thinking about her, wondering if he would ever see her again, wondering if anyone would. The alien ship crossed Mars's orbit at 10:23 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. It had been decelerating steadily, which some analysts took as a good sign. It wasn't planning to simply crash into Earth at relativistic speeds, which would have been a quick if brutal way to end human civilization. Others pointed out that conquerors generally preferred their new territories intact. The ship's trajectory was perfect, too perfect, threaded through the solar system's orbital mechanics like a needle through silk. Whatever species had built this vessel, they understood physics and engineering at a level that made humanity's greatest achievements look like stone tools. Communication attempts had been ongoing since first detection, broadcasting on every frequency, in every language, using mathematical principles and prime numbers and every other first contact protocol that centuries of science fiction and decades of serious xenological study had developed. The alien ship's response had been total, deafening silence. Dr. Amara Okafor, the United Earth Council's chief xenolinguist, sat in her lab at the council headquarters in Geneva, surrounded by screens showing waveform analyses and symbolic logic trees, searching desperately for some pattern, some hint that the aliens were receiving and processing humanity's messages. She was 38 years old, brilliant, and had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, the first contact with an alien intelligence. In every simulation, every scenario her team had run, there had been communication, even if difficult or slow. The silence from this ship was more unnerving than any threat could have been. It suggested either complete indifference to humanity's existence or something so alien that communication itself might be impossible. Neither option offered much hope. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed another sequence, knowing it was likely futile, but unable to stop trying. Somewhere above her, beyond the sky, that massive vessel grew closer with each passing moment. The ship crossed Earth's moon at 2:15 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. It was close enough now that amateur astronomers could see it with backyard telescopes, a dark blot against the stars that grew larger by the minute. Social media had dissolved into chaos hours ago, a mixture of panic, prayer, denial, and the strange carnival atmosphere that sometimes gripped humanity in the face of the incomprehensible. Some people fled the cities. Others gathered in the streets or in churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues. A significant number simply went to work, because what else was there to do? The global economy had functionally frozen, though a few stock traders were still trying to make money off the apocalypse with a determination that was almost admirable in its audacity. News networks broadcast continuous coverage, cycling through the same handful of facts and increasingly wild speculation. Governments urged calm while simultaneously preparing for the worst. In 1,000 cities, families held each other and waited. At 3 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the alien warship stopped. It had entered a perfect geosynchronous orbit directly above the Pacific Ocean, positioned so that it was visible to nearly half the planet at any given time. From Earth's surface, it appeared as a dark oval roughly the size of a full moon, an impossible object hanging in the sky where no object that size had any right to be. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Humanity had spent its entire existence as the unchallenged masters of Earth, the dominant intelligence, the builders and dreamers and rulers. Now, in an instant, they had been reduced to ants staring up at a descending boot, waiting to see if they would be crushed or simply ignored. The collective trauma would take generations to process, assuming there were generations to come. Then, at 3:47 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, exactly 12 hours after first detection, the alien ship finally responded. Not with words or mathematical proofs or any of the carefully planned first contact protocols. Instead, a single beam of coherent energy lanced down from the ship's underbelly, a column of pale blue light that carved through the atmosphere and touched down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with pinpoint precision. The ocean began to boil where the beam struck, sending up vast clouds of steam. The energy readings were off the scale, enough power to run human civilization for a century being poured into the water every second. Military satellites repositioned frantically, trying to understand what was happening. Was this an attack? A demonstration of power? Within minutes, analysis provided an answer that raised more questions than it resolved. The beam wasn't a weapon, at least not in any conventional sense. It appeared to be some kind of matter conversion or extraction process. The alien ship was mining Earth's ocean, pulling hydrogen from the water at a staggering rate. The United Earth Council faced an impossible decision. Was this act hostile? The aliens were taking Earth's resources without permission, but the amount of water being extracted, while massive by human standards, was functionally insignificant compared to the total volume of Earth's oceans. They could run that beam for 1,000 years and barely lower sea level by a centimeter. Should humanity resist? Commander Webb had the Valiant in position, could launch an attack within minutes, but every tactical analysis said the same thing: any assault would be suicide and would likely provoke a response that could end human civilization. Should they continue attempting communication? The aliens had shown they were capable of action, but still maintained absolute radio silence. The debate raged for precious minutes while the blue beam continued its work and the alien ship loomed overhead like a floating mountain. It was Saracen who noticed the second anomaly. Still at her station in Auckland, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, she had been monitoring every sensor feed she could access when she spotted something that the military analysts, focused on weapons and threats, had missed. The alien ship was transmitting, not radio or laser communications, but something far more subtle. Gravitational waves, rhythmic fluctuations in spacetime itself, pulsing out from the vessel in complex patterns. It was an incredibly sophisticated method of communication, one that human science had only recently developed the ability to detect, let alone decode. Sarah immediately forwarded her findings to Dr. Okafor's team, and within an hour, they had made a breakthrough. The gravitational patterns weren't language, exactly, but they contained structure, information. Working with quantum physicists and communication specialists across the globe, Amara began the painstaking process of translation. What they discovered changed everything. The aliens weren't ignoring humanity's communications. They had been studying them, learning from them, and now they were responding in kind. The gravitational message was complex, but its core meaning was becoming clear. The alien ship was damaged. It had traveled for decades, possibly centuries, fleeing from something the translation team couldn't quite parse. The concept didn't map cleanly onto any human framework, but the emotional weight was clear: it was terror. The vessel was a refugee, not a conqueror. It needed hydrogen to repair its faster-than-light drive, needed it desperately, and Earth's oceans represented salvation. The message contained what appeared to be an apology for the intrusion and a promise. In exchange for fuel, the aliens offered knowledge, technology, a chance to join what the message called the stellar community of civilized species. They hadn't asked permission because they hadn't known if permission would be granted, and they couldn't afford to wait. Their pursuers, whatever they were still coming. The United Earth Council chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives argued this could be a trick, a sophisticated ploy to lower humanity's guard. Others pointed out that a ship that size could simply take whatever it wanted. The polite fiction of asking permission was meaningless when one party held all the power. Religious leaders grappled with the theological implications while scientists could barely contain their excitement at the prospect of accessing alien technology. Environmental groups worried about unknown ecological impacts while economists tried to calculate the value of starfaring knowledge. Through it all, the clock ticked forward, and the alien ship continued its extraction, patient and unstoppable. Finally, after 3 hours of intense discussion, Secretary General Kwame Adeyemi called for a vote. The measure passed with a narrow majority. Humanity would grant permission for the aliens to take what they needed, and in exchange, would open formal diplomatic relations. They would take a leap of faith that had no precedent in human history. Dr. Amara Okafor crafted the response personally, encoding it into gravitational waves using the pattern the aliens had established, hoping desperately that her translation was accurate. She told them yes, they could have the hydrogen they needed. She told them humanity was willing to meet, to talk, to learn. She told them welcome to Earth, and hoped it wouldn't be the last message humanity ever sent. The transmission was broadcast from every gravitational wave generator the planet possessed, a chorus of acceptance that rippled out through space-time toward the silent vessel hanging overhead. For long minutes, there was no response. The blue extraction beam continued unabated. People around the world watched their screens and held their breath. Then, slowly, the beam began to withdraw. It took 20 minutes for the column of light to fully retract into the ship's hull, leaving behind a vast cloud of steam that would take days to fully dissipate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien ship began to move. It descended slowly, carefully, shedding orbital velocity with a grace that should have been impossible for something so massive. The target became clear quickly. It was heading for the Pacific, for international waters far from any coastline. Naval vessels from a dozen nations scrambled to establish a perimeter while news helicopters raced to be the first to capture footage. The ship settled into the ocean with surprising delicacy, displacing billions of gallons of water but doing so gradually enough that the resulting waves, while massive, were manageable rather than catastrophic. Coastal warning systems blared along the Pacific Rim, and low-lying areas were evacuated, but the predicted devastation never materialized. The aliens, it seemed, were being careful. When the great vessel finally came to rest, it sat half-submerged like a floating island, its upper structures rising kilometers into the air while its lower sections presumably extended deep beneath the waves. The displacement had created a new geographical feature visible from space, a ring of disturbed ocean surrounding the ship like a moat. And then, after all the drama of arrival and descent, the aliens simply stopped and waited. The question of who should make first physical contact sparked another fierce debate. Diplomats argued it should be a political representative. Scientists insisted it required trained first contact specialists. The military wanted a security team present. Religious leaders requested inclusion. In the end, a compromise was reached. A delegation of 12 would approach the vessel, representing a cross-section of humanity, scientists, diplomats, military, religious leaders, and, in a decision that sparked significant controversy, 2 civilians chosen by random lottery from the global population. The message was clear: this moment belonged to all of humanity, not just its elite. The delegates were given 72 hours to prepare, to say goodbye to their families, to come to terms with the fact that they might not return. Some spent the time in prayer. Others studied what little was known about the alien ship. A few simply tried to sleep, though few managed more than an hour or two. The weight of history pressed down on all of them with crushing force. Commander Marcus Webb was chosen to lead the delegation's security element, a decision he accepted with grim determination. Dr. Sarachin, whose early detection and analysis had been crucial, was selected as one of the scientific representatives, and she spent her preparation time trying not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Dr. Amara Okafor would serve as chief communications specialist, carrying the weight of ensuring humanity and the aliens could actually understand each other. Among the civilian selections was a woman named Isabella Reyes, a 26-year-old teacher from Mexico City who had been selected in the lottery and who still seemed to be in a state of shock at her inclusion. The other civilian was Hiroshi Tanaka, a 67-year-old fisherman from Hokkaido who accepted his selection with a calm that bordered on zen. Together, these 12 individuals and their support teams boarded a series of helicopters and began the journey to the coordinates where the alien ship waited. As they approached, the true scale of the vessel became apparent. The photographs and video hadn't done it justice. It was a mountain of dark metal rising from the sea, covered in structures whose purposes could only be guessed at. Portions of the hull seemed to shimmer with energy fields. Other sections appeared damaged, great rents in the armor showing twisted internal structures that looked almost organic. The ship had clearly been through trauma, had fought and fled and barely survived. Lights glowed from within some of the openings, a warm amber color that seemed almost inviting after the cold darkness of the exterior. As the helicopters circled, searching for a landing point, a platform extended smoothly from one of the lower structures, just above the waterline. It was clearly an invitation, and after a brief consultation, the delegation agreed to accept it. The helicopters began their final approach, and humanity prepared to meet its neighbors in the cosmos for the very first time. Whatever happened next would echo through all the generations to come, assuming there were generations to come. The platform awaited, and beyond it, an open airlock glowing with amber light, beckoning humanity forward into an unknown future. The airlock cycled with a sound like distant thunder, and the delegation stepped into a corridor that defied every expectation they had carried with them. The interior of the alien ship was vast, cathedral-like in its proportions, with walls that seemed to shift between metallic solidity and something closer to living tissue. The amber light came from no visible source, instead seeming to emanate from the walls themselves in gentle pulses that reminded Sarah of a heartbeat. The air that rushed in to meet them was warm and carried a scent like ozone mixed with something floral that had no earthly equivalent. Bioscanners confirmed it was breathable, surprisingly close to Earth's atmospheric composition, though whether that was coincidence or the aliens had adjusted their environment for human visitors remained unclear. Commander Webb kept his hand near his sidearm, though he knew it was purely psychological comfort. If the aliens meant harm, small arms wouldn't save them. They had walked perhaps 50 meters when the corridor opened into a chamber so large that its far walls were lost in hazy distance. And there, finally, humanity met the species that had crossed the stars in desperation and hope. The aliens stood in a semicircle, 7 figures waiting with a stillness that spoke of both patience and uncertainty. They were tall, averaging perhaps 8 feet in height, with bodies that seemed to shift between bipedal and something more fluid depending on how the light caught them. Their skin, if it could be called that, was a deep iridescent blue that shimmered with undertones of silver and violet. They had 4 arms, 2 primary limbs roughly analogous to human arms, and 2 smaller secondary appendages that folded against their torsos. Their heads were elongated, featuring large eyes that held vertical pupils and contained depths of color that seemed to shift like oil on water. They wore garments that appeared to be part clothing and part living symbiote, flowing fabrics that moved with conscious grace. They were utterly alien, and yet something in their posture, in the way they held themselves, communicated nervousness and hope in a way that transcended species. The central figure stepped forward, moving with a flow and grace that made human movement seem clumsy by comparison. When it spoke, the sound came not from any visible mouth but seemed to resonate through the air itself, through the walls, through the bones of everyone present. The words were incomprehensible, a melody of tones that human vocal cords could never reproduce. But then something remarkable happened. The alien gestured with one secondary arm, and a device floated forward, a sphere of crystalline material that began to glow with soft light. It positioned itself between the 2 groups, and suddenly the alien sounds began to resolve into words, stilted and clearly machine-translated, but understandable. We are the Kaelshan. We are refugees. We are grateful. We are hopeful. We are terrified. We are sorry for our intrusion into your world. We are desperate. We are peaceful. We come seeking sanctuary. Dr. Amara Okafor stepped forward, her years of training warring with her very human awe at this moment. She spoke slowly, clearly, hoping the translation device would work both ways. We are humans. We are the people of Earth. We are cautious but welcoming. We have many questions. We want to understand. Where are you fleeing from? The alien's large eyes seemed to focus on her with an intensity that was almost physical. There was a long pause, and when the Kaelshan responded, even through the clinical translation device, the emotion was unmistakable. Fear. We flee from the devourers, the species you would call the Jafik. They consume worlds, not for sustenance but for expansion. They are a hive intelligence, vast and merciless. They have pursued us for 27 of your years across dozens of star systems. Our people numbered in the billions when we fled our homeworld. This ship carries the last 43,000 survivors of the Kaelshan civilization. We are all that remains. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. An entire civilization reduced to the population of a small town, fleeing across the cosmos in a damaged vessel with nowhere to go. Isabella Reyes, the teacher from Mexico City, found tears streaming down her face. Hiroshi Tanaka, the fisherman, bowed deeply in a gesture of respect and shared sorrow that needed no translation. Commander Webb felt his tactical instincts screaming a warning even as his humanity reeled at the tragedy. These devourers, he said carefully, are they still pursuing you? Are they coming here? The lead Kaelshan made a gesture that the translation sphere interpreted as affirmative. Yes. They follow our trail through the dimensional substrate. We estimate they will arrive in this system within 140 of your days. We had hoped to repair our vessel and flee before they arrived. We did not know your world was inhabited by a developing intelligence until we entered the system. We faced a choice: intrude upon your world and hope for mercy, or drift in the void until our systems failed. We chose to hope. The implications crashed down on the delegation like a tidal wave. The aliens hadn't just come to Earth seeking fuel. They had inadvertently, or perhaps inevitably, led their pursuers directly to humanity's doorstep. In less than 5 months, this world-devouring species would arrive in Earth's solar system, and humanity would be caught in the crossfire of an interstellar conflict it had no power to influence. Some might call it the worst first contact scenario imaginable. But as Sarachan looked at the Kaelshan delegation, at their posture of exhausted hope, at the visible signs of trauma and loss they carried, she found herself thinking something unexpected. They came to us. Out of all the empty worlds they could have harvested fuel from, all the dead systems they could have hidden in, they chose to approach a living civilization. They chose to take the risk of rejection or attack rather than slip away unseen. That meant something. That suggested a kind of courage, or perhaps desperation so profound it transcended self-preservation. The delegation was escorted deeper into the ship, through corridors lined with what appeared to be living quarters, cramped spaces where Kaelshan families huddled together, their possessions reduced to whatever they had managed to carry when their world fell. Children, smaller versions of the adults with proportionally larger eyes, peered out at the strange bipedal aliens with curiosity and wariness. The ship was a refugee vessel in the truest sense, packed far beyond its intended capacity, showing signs of hasty repairs and jury-rigged systems keeping critical functions running through determination and ingenuity. They passed medical bays where the injured lay in tanks of luminescent fluid, and memorial walls covered in symbols that needed no translation. They were names, thousands upon thousands of names, the remembered dead of a dying species. Dr. Okafor found herself walking beside a Kaelshan who introduced herself through the translation sphere as researcher Velnara, a xenobiologist who had studied life on dozens of worlds before her civilization fell. The two scientists found an immediate kinship, comparing notes on their respective fields despite the awkwardness of the translation technology. Velnara explained that the Kaelshan had been a peaceful species, explorers and scholars who had made first contact with 17 different civilizations and had been preparing to welcome humanity into the interstellar community within the next century, once human technology had advanced sufficiently. They had been monitoring Earth's development for decades, had watched humanity's struggles and triumphs with the fascination of anthropologists studying a younger species finding its way. Then the Jafik had come to Kaelshan space, emerging from a region of space previously thought empty, a hive species that saw other civilizations not as potential allies but as resources to be absorbed. The war had been brief and brutal. The Kaelshan, for all their advanced technology, were unprepared for an enemy that felt no fear, made no negotiations, and accepted no surrender. Commander Webb was given a tactical briefing by the Kaelshan military commander, a scarred veteran named war leader Thexral who carried himself with the bearing of a soldier who had lost too many battles. The Jafik, Thexral explained through the translation device, were a horror born from biological engineering gone catastrophically wrong on some ancient world. They were individually weak but collectively unstoppable, billions of organisms functioning as a single distributed intelligence. They traveled in living ships grown from captured worlds, vast organic constructs that could regenerate damage and adapt to any weapon used against them. The Jafik didn't conquer worlds in any traditional sense. They arrived, they landed seed ships, and within weeks the entire biosphere would be consumed and converted into more Jafik. Every living thing on a planet became raw material for their expansion. Dozens of civilizations had fallen before them over the centuries, and each conquest made them stronger, gave them access to more biological diversity to incorporate into their collective. The briefing was interrupted by an urgent summons. The entire delegation was brought before the Kaelshan Council of Elders, the leadership of the refugee fleet, in a chamber near the ship's center. 7 ancient Kaelshan sat in a semicircle, their skin bearing patterns that denoted age and wisdom in their culture. The eldest, who introduced herself as Matriarch Sailtora, addressed the humans directly. "We have made a grave error," she said, and her words carried a weight of sorrow that transcended the mechanical translation. "In our desperation, we did not consider that we might endanger an innocent species. We have brought death to your world as surely as if we had fired weapons ourselves. The Jafik will come, and when they find your planet teeming with life, they will not be able to resist. Even if we depart now, our trail leads here. We have inadvertently condemned your species to the same fate that befell ours. For this, we offer our deepest shame and our most profound apologies. We are prepared to leave immediately if you wish, though we know it changes nothing." The chamber fell silent. Back on Earth, transmitted through encrypted channels, the United Earth Council was in emergency session. Military leaders were already running scenarios, all of them grim. Evacuation was impossible, humanity had barely begun to colonize its own solar system, there was nowhere to run. Defense seemed equally futile. If a species as advanced as the Kaelshan had fallen to the Jafik, what hope did humanity have? Some voices called for the Kaelshan to be forced to leave immediately, as if distance might somehow make Earth less of a target. Others argued for cooperation, that the only chance for either species was to stand together. Scientists were already clamoring for access to Kaelshan technology, arguing that maybe, just maybe, humanity's different perspective might find a solution the Kaelshan had missed. The debate raged for hours while the delegation waited in the alien ship, suspended between two civilizations trying to process the impossible. It was Isabella Reyes who broke the silence in the council chamber, speaking not as a representative of any government but as a human being confronting an impossible situation. "You came to us for help," she said simply. "You were dying, and you came to us. You took a risk, exposed yourselves to a species you didn't know, because you needed help and you hoped we would be kind. How can we respond to that with rejection? How can we turn away refugees fleeing genocide and still call ourselves civilized?" Her words, translated and retransmitted to Earth, struck a chord that cut through the political calculations and military strategies. Within hours, a new narrative began to emerge in the global conversation. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting itself, nation against nation, ideology against ideology, over resources and territory and pride. Now, faced with an external threat of existential magnitude, something shifted in the collective consciousness. The question wasn't whether to help the Kaelshan. The question was how to survive together. The United Earth Council's decision, when it came, was unprecedented in human history. Not only would the Kaelshan be granted sanctuary, but humanity would commit its entire industrial capacity to a joint defense effort. Every nation would contribute. Every resource would be mobilized. The Kaelshan would share their technology, and humanity would provide manpower, raw materials, and perhaps most importantly, a world that could serve as a fortress instead of a fleeing ship. It was audacious to the point of madness. Humanity was proposing to go from a single-planet species to fighting an interstellar war in less than 5 months. The Kaelshan Council was stunned by the proposal. Matriarch Sailtora expressed what seemed to be their collective disbelief. "You would risk your entire civilization for a species you met hours ago? You would fight a war you cannot win rather than flee or hide? This is madness." Commander Webb smiled grimly. "Maybe. But we've never been very good at quiet surrender. If the Jafik are coming here regardless, then we'd rather face them on our feet than our knees. And you're not strangers anymore. You're refugees who came to us for help. That means something." What followed was the most intensive period of cooperation and advancement in human history. Kaelshan engineers worked alongside human scientists to decrypt and adapt alien technology for human use. Massive construction projects began across the globe and throughout the solar system. Orbital shipyards that had been building satellites started producing warships based on Kaelshan designs but modified for human manufacturing capabilities. The moon became a massive weapons platform, its surface bristling with energy cannons and missile batteries. Humanity's handful of colony stations on Mars and the outer planets were converted into early warning outposts and supply depots. Technology that should have taken centuries to develop was compressed into weeks through the desperate alchemy of necessity and cooperation. Fusion reactors, energy shields, faster-than-light communications, weapons that could shatter asteroids, all of it was built, tested, and deployed at a pace that should have been impossible. But technology alone wouldn't be enough, and everyone knew it. The Jafik had defeated civilizations far more advanced than Earth. What humanity brought to the Alliance wasn't superior technology but something the Kaelshan had lost in their long flight: hope, audacity, and a kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that bordered on irrational. Human military strategists, freed from the constraints of fighting other humans, began developing tactics specifically designed to counter a hive intelligence. If the Jafik's strength was their collective nature, then humanity would find ways to disrupt it, fragment it, force them to fight as individuals. Cybersecurity experts proposed digital warfare strategies. Biologists worked on potential pathogens that might disrupt Jafik coordination. Every advantage, no matter how small, was pursued with relentless determination. Amid the frantic preparations, something unexpected began to bloom. Kelshan families, given quarters on Earth while their ship underwent repairs in orbit, began to integrate into human communities. Cultural exchanges happened organically, driven by curiosity and shared purpose. Children, human and Kelshan alike, played together in parks with an innocent acceptance that adults struggled to match. Artists from both species collaborated on works that blended their perspectives. And inevitably, because intelligence and emotion transcend species, deeper connections formed. Dr. Sarachan found herself spending increasingly long hours with researcher Velnara, conversations about exobiology gradually shifting to more personal topics, shared fears, and hopes and dreams. The Kelshan concept of partnership was different from human romance, more focused on intellectual and emotional resonance than physical attraction, but the underlying emotions were recognizable. Respect became friendship became something deeper that neither quite had words for. Commander Webb formed an unexpected bond with war leader Thexral, two old soldiers who had seen too much and carried too many scars, finding solace in shared understanding. Dr. Okafor discovered that her counterpart in Kelshan linguistics, a gentle scholar named Prasil, shared her love of ancient poetry and her tendency to work through the night when inspiration struck. Isabella Reyes became close friends with a young Kelshan mother named Caravel, bonding over shared experiences of teaching children and trying to maintain normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. These individual connections, multiplied across thousands of interactions, wove a network of relationships that transformed the alliance from one of convenience to one of genuine care. Humanity wasn't just fighting to protect Earth anymore. They were fighting to protect friends, partners, and the fragile hope that two species might build something beautiful together if only they could survive. The Jafik arrived on day 138, 6 days ahead of schedule. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the system's edge, not as a single vessel but as a swarm. Hundreds of organic ships, each kilometers long, pulsing with bioluminescence and surrounded by clouds of smaller attack organisms. Long-range sensors showed them beginning their approach to Earth, moving with the inexorable patience of a species that had never known defeat. Warning alarms sounded across the planet. Military forces scrambled to battle stations. Civilians moved to designated shelters, massive underground complexes that had been excavated in a few short months with Kelshan mining technology. The Kelshan flagship, now repaired and reinforced with human-built armor and weapons, took up position at the fleet's vanguard alongside the Valiant and 36 other human warships, a united armada that would have seemed impossible mere months ago. As the Jafik crossed Mars's orbit, Earth broadcasted a message across all frequencies, in every language, human and Kelshan, and even translated into the Jafik's own biochemical signaling patterns. It was simple and direct: this world is defended. Turn back or be destroyed. The response from the Jafik was equally clear. The swarm accelerated, rushing toward Earth like a tidal wave of living ships, confident in their inevitable victory. They had consumed dozens of worlds. What was one more? But as they crossed the orbit of Luna, they discovered what made humanity unthinkable to species that relied on conventional warfare. Earth didn't wait to be attacked. Earth didn't deploy defensive formations or fight a strategic retreat. Instead, humanity did something that shocked both their Kelshan allies and their Jafik enemies. They attacked first, and not with warships or orbital platforms. Humanity had spent 5 months turning their entire solar system into a weapon. Asteroids that had been hollowed out and fitted with faster-than-light engines suddenly materialized in the middle of the Jafik formation, their courses calculated with suicidal precision. Each asteroid carried fusion warheads in the megaton range, and they detonated simultaneously, turning the void into a storm of nuclear fire. The Jafik swarm reeled, dozens of bioships vaporized instantly, hundreds more damaged and disoriented. Before they could recover, the second wave hit. Railgun platforms on the moon opened fire, accelerating projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed, simple tungsten rods that struck with the force of tactical nuclear weapons. Mars orbital stations launched swarms of autonomous hunter-killer drones, small enough to evade point defenses but equipped with shaped plasma charges designed to penetrate organic hulls. And from Earth itself, from arrays positioned across the globe, came the most devastating weapon of all: coordinated electromagnetic pulses tuned specifically to disrupt the biochemical signaling that Japhet used to coordinate their hive intelligence. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the swarm. Individual Japhet organisms, suddenly cut off from the collective intelligence, panicked. Bioships collided with each other or veered off course. Attack organisms designed to function as a coordinated swarm instead fought each other in confusion. The Japhet had never faced an enemy willing to weaponize their entire star system, had never encountered a species so audacious as to turn every piece of space debris into a potential kinetic weapon. The human Kaelshan fleet pressed the advantage, warships darting through the chaos to target the largest bioships with concentrated fire. Commander Webb, standing on the Valiant's bridge with Thexral beside him, allowed himself a grim smile. "We're not the most advanced species in the galaxy," he said, "but we've had 10,000 years of practice at war. Welcome to Earth." The battle raged for 18 hours, a churning maelstrom of energy weapons and living ships, of human audacity and Kaelshan precision combining into something greater than either could achieve alone. The Japhet, for all their biological advantages, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns. Human pilots flew attack runs that violated every safety protocol, dancing on the edge of destruction to deliver killing blows. Kaelshan gunners maintained withering fields of fire, protecting their more reckless human allies even as they marveled at the sheer determination on display. When a Japhet breakthrough threatened to reach Earth's atmosphere, civilian volunteers and barely armed shuttles formed a desperate last line of defense, ramming the organic ships in acts of sacrifice that became legend. The Japhet had expected to face a primitive species and a broken remnant of the Kaelshan. Instead, they found themselves in a grinding battle of attrition against an enemy fighting for their homes with every weapon at their disposal. When the Japhet finally broke, it was as sudden as their arrival had been confident. The hive intelligence, faced with losses that made continued assault tactically unfavorable, made a decision that shocked both defenders. They retreated. The remaining bioships, perhaps 40% of the original force, turned and fled back toward the system's edge, accelerating hard. Human vessels moved to pursue, but the Kaelshan commanders called them back. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Japhet would return, with more ships and different tactics, adapted to counter what they had learned here. But for now, for this moment, Earth and its 43,000 Kaelshan refugees had survived the impossible. They had faced a species that had destroyed civilizations and driven them away bloodied and defeated. The cost had been severe: thousands of casualties, both human and Kaelshan, dozens of ships destroyed, damage to orbital infrastructure that would take years to repair. But they had proven something crucial: united, the two species could fight and win. In the aftermath, as repair crews worked around the clock and memorial services honored the fallen, the true significance of what had happened began to sink in. Humanity had made first contact, learned of an existential threat, and survived their baptism of fire in interstellar warfare, all in less than 5 months. The Kaelshan, who had known only defeat and flight for decades, had remembered how to fight and hope again. Together, they had achieved what neither could have managed alone. Sarachan stood on the observation deck of the repaired Kaelshan flagship, looking down at Earth with Velnara beside her. The Kaelshan researcher extended one delicate hand, and Sarah took it, marveling at the warmth and the slight electric tingle of the contact. "Your species is remarkable," Velnara said softly. "We came seeking fuel and found something far more precious. We found allies, friends, perhaps even a new home, if you will have us." Sarah smiled, thinking of all the changes the last 5 months had brought, the terror and wonder and unexpected connections. "I think we need each other," she said. "You've given us the stars and shown us we're not alone in the universe. We've reminded you that being beaten doesn't mean being defeated. Together, maybe we can build something that will outlast the Japhet, outlast any threat." She squeezed Velnara's hand gently. "Besides, someone needs to teach you humans about proper scientific protocols. You're all terrifyingly reckless." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the blue marble of Earth slowly rotate below, a world that had been forever changed by the arrival of a desperate refugee ship. The Japhet would return, everyone knew that. There would be more battles, more losses, years or decades of struggle ahead. But humanity had done the unthinkable. Faced with overwhelming force and certain doom, they had chosen hope over despair, alliance over isolation, and audacious resistance over quiet surrender. And in doing so, they had saved not just themselves but an entire species, and perhaps discovered that the thing that made humanity special wasn't their technology or their military might, but their stubborn, irrational, beautiful refusal to accept that some things were impossible. The United Earth Council formally offered permanent sanctuary to the Kaelshan people 3 days after the battle. The proposal passed unanimously, a first in the Council's history. Integration programs were established, combining Kaelshan knowledge with human industry to build defenses that would make Earth impregnable. Joint colonies were planned for Mars and the outer planets, mixing human and Kaelshan populations from the start. Educational exchanges began, with Kaelshan scholars teaching in human universities and human students learning aboard the flagship. New friendships and partnerships formed daily, weaving the two species together in ways both practical and profound. And in the quiet moments between the grand projects and historic decisions, individuals found connection, understanding, and sometimes even love in forms that transcended the boundaries of species. The galaxy had believed Earth was insignificant, a backwater world of primitives centuries away from joining the stellar community. The Japhet had believed humanity would be easy prey, another world to be consumed in their endless expansion. Both had underestimated what happened when humanity was pushed to the edge and given something worth fighting for. When the giant alien warship had entered Earth's orbit, humanity had done something unthinkable. They had opened their arms to strangers, weaponized their entire world, and fought with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. And in doing so, they had announced their arrival on the interstellar stage not as victims or primitives, but as a force to be reckoned with, as protectors of the desperate, as allies worth having. The age of humanity standing alone in the cosmos was over. The age of humanity among the stars, fighting alongside friends and defending the innocent, had just begun. And the universe would never be quite the same again.